Hello everyone and welcome back. Let's learn about browser cookies and how they are usually used to implement user authentication. This is just one possible mechanism. We will also talk about JSON Web Tokens in a future section. In this lesson, we are going to complete here the sign up screen. We are going to not only store the user and the password digest on the database, we are also going to create a session and store it in memory, linking it to the user. So in order to do that, we need to create here somewhere where to store the sessions. We're going to create here an extra file where we are going to define here a session store. So this is simply going to be a class that we are going to call session store. This class is going to contain here a variable that will contain the sessions. We are going to store the sessions per session key. We're going to make it private. We're going to call this variable sessions, and we're going to be defining it as a map. So the key to this map is going to be a string, which is going to be a session ID. And the value, it's going to be a session object that we have defined in the previous lessons. So we have exported here the class. Instead, let's not export it so that it cannot be instantiated outside this file. Let's instead define here a constant that we are going to call the session store, and we are going to export that instead as a global application singleton. So there will be only one instance of a session store in the whole Node.js server. Now what we need to do is to add here a new method called createSession that is going to allow us to create a new session instance and add it here to the sessions map. Because this implementation is going to be very simple, I'm just going to paste it in here and we're going to review it together. We simply import here the user class. So let's see, the createSession method takes two arguments, the session ID and the user. It takes those arguments to create a new session object, and then we just store it here on our sessions map. So the key of the map is going to be the session ID so that we can easily retrieve it later. With this method in place, we can now go back here to the create user route, and at this point we are going to create the session and store it in memory. So we are going to call the session store and we're going to call the create session method. We're going to pass in the session ID and the user. So with this we have created the session and it's now stored in memory on the server. What we need to do now is to link the HTTP requests of the user to this particular session ID. So for that we're going to be using a cookie, and let's have a look here at our server. Whenever we switched branches last time, we have added here an extra middleware to express the cookie parser module. And what this middleware does is it allows our Express server to process cookies, so to read cookies and to write them back to an HTTP request. With this in place, we are going to go to the response object, and using this API simply named cookie, we are going to set a value for a cookie. It's going to be named session ID, so it's important that the cookie name does not reveal anything about the server implementation. For example, there is a well-known cookie called JSessionID. This immediately tells to an attacker that the server is implemented in Java, meaning that the attacker could then look up for vulnerabilities specific of that particular platform. So we are going to keep the session cookie name technology agnostic. We are going to call it simply session ID, and we're going to set it with the value of this variable. So with this in place, we have set a cookie and we have attached it to the response. The cookie is going to be set in the browser and it's going to be sent back to the server in all other subsequent HTTP requests. So that is the standard cookie functionality. Let's have a look at it in action then. Let's then switch to another window where we have the application on a full screen. We are going to be opening here the Chrome DevTools in the Network tab, and let's have a look at what happens on the HTTP response when we submit here a new user. Before doing so, let's quickly switch here to the session store and fix here a small issue that we had still we forgot here to initialize the sessions variable. We are going to initialize it here to an empty map so that when we access it the first time, we are not going to get back an error. So we are going to hit Ctrl S. This is going to reload the new version of the server. And once that is up and running, we are going to create our user. So we are going to hit the sign up button, and we can see that we have here an HTTP post that was made to our node server. The result was 200 OK. Let's have a look at the headers. So as we can see, here we have the set cookie header that is setting the value of the session ID cookie with the session ID that we created on the server. So let's confirm it ends in A44, and if we switch back here to our server, this is indeed the session ID that was just generated. So going back here to this window, we can see here that this set cookie header is just a plain HTTP header, and when the browser receives this header, it's going to set the value of the cookie. Let's quickly confirm this. We are going to go here to the application tab of the Chrome DevTools. Let's open here the cookies of our local host, and as we can see, the session ID cookie has been correctly set. So now this means that the next time that we make a request to the server, and let's remove here the filter, we are going to now see all the requests. If we reload the application and we send another request here to the server, so the sign up request that corresponds to reloading the browser window, we are going to see that in this initial HTTP request for reloading the application, we can see here that we have sent the cookies to the server that contain the session ID. So here is the session ID at the level of the cookie header. So as we can see, a cookie is simply an HTTP header with a special behavior. The browser will populate that header automatically for us according to the values of the set cookie of some previous response that we have received. This means that from now on, every HTTP request will include this cookie. So on the server, we can then read the value of this cookie, and based on the session ID, we will be able to tell which user is sending which request. So this, in a nutshell, is in general how cookies work in a browser and how cookies are usually used to store the session ID and how they enable authentication in our solution. There are other uses for cookies, but this is maybe the number one use case: user authentication. Another common use case is to store in a cookie the preferred language of the user. In all cases, it's important to keep in mind that cookies are really a storage mechanism. They are not inherently tied to authentication. Let's learn a bit more about cookies. We are going to talk about a couple of interesting properties from a security perspective.